Hi, you're watching Reddit Confessions, and this story begins the exact moment I realized I was married to a stranger. She wasn't crying. She wasn't yelling. She was just nodding. That's what will haunt me most. The way she nodded as he spoke, like his version of the truth was more believable than mine. Like the years she spent with me were suddenly on trial, and he was the only credible witness. I stood there in our living room, still wearing my muddy sneakers, holding the envelope I had rushed home to show her. I had been offered the promotion, the one we'd prayed for during lockdown, the one that meant we could finally leave the shoebox apartment and maybe start fresh somewhere quieter, warmer. But before I could even open my mouth, he was already on speakerphone, and she was already taking his side. "No, I get it," she said to him, her eyes flicking toward me just once. "He can be like that. He always means well. But, the sentence never finished. It didn't have to. She pressed the button to end the call. Then silence. Not even the hum of the refrigerator dared to interrupt. I waited for her to say something. Anything. An apology. A joke. A denial. Instead, she picked up her glass of wine and looked at me like I was the one who had intruded on their night. "What?" she asked, almost bored. "What?" I repeated, my voice cracking. "You really let him say all that about me? Right in front of you? And you just agreed?" She shrugged. "You overreacted." It was always that phrase, like she'd borrowed it from some dusty drawer of condescending vocabulary. You overreacted. Translation: your emotions are inconvenient, and your perception is flawed. I should have stayed quiet. I should have walked away and given myself time to process. But there was something about that moment, the absolute betrayal, the absence of shame in her face, the glass of wine that suddenly felt like a prop, that flipped something inside me. So I said it, not loudly, not dramatically, just honestly. "You're not the woman I married, and I'm starting to think you never were." She blinked. That was the only reaction. A single blink, like dust had gotten in her eye, and just like that, the end began. I expected her to scream. I expected her to throw the wine glass or call me dramatic or accuse me of twisting everything like I always supposedly did. But no, she did none of that. She simply turned away, walked to the hallway mirror, adjusted her hair like she was about to leave for dinner, and said over her shoulder, "You always take things so personally." That line stayed with me the rest of the night, clinging to me like the scent of something rotting. I remember sitting at the edge of our bed, the side I had claimed years ago, the one closest to the window, staring at the floor, trying to understand if I had just imagined everything, if I had blown up my own marriage over a moment of miscommunication. But no matter how many ways I replayed it, the truth was the same. She defended him. Not me. Not even neutrally. She took his side as if it had always been hers. I tried to sleep, but the silence between us was so loud it started to feel like pressure in my chest. Around 3 a.m., I got up and went into the kitchen for water. That's when I saw her phone buzzing on the counter. A message lit up the screen. I didn't even mean to look. It was instinct. And there it was. A name I had never seen before. Ash. I tapped the screen and froze. Not because I saw anything explicit. There were no naked pictures or scandalous emojis. Just words. Sentences that meant nothing and everything. "Thanks for standing up for me tonight. I hate how he treats you. You deserve better." There was a pause. Then another text arrived. "You looked stunning. Even angry." I placed the phone down so slowly you'd think it was made of glass. My heart was thudding in a way that didn't feel emotional. It felt physical, like a panic attack coming to life. I wanted to scream. I wanted to storm into the bedroom and demand answers. But instead, I walked out to the balcony in bare feet and sat in the cold until sunrise. And I remember thinking something I had never allowed myself to admit before. I don't trust her anymore. Not just with another man. Not just with her feelings. I don't trust that she sees me as a person anymore. She woke up around 9 a.m., humming to herself, making coffee like we were just two regular people in a regular marriage. I stood there in the doorway of the kitchen, arms crossed, waiting for her to say anything about the night before. But she didn't. In fact, she smiled when she saw me and said, "You should shave, babe. You're starting to look like a conspiracy theorist." And that's when it hit me. She wasn't going to apologize. She wasn't even going to acknowledge what had happened. Because for her, it wasn't a betrayal. It was just life. Something I was supposed to swallow like so many other quiet humiliations before. But I couldn't swallow this one. Not anymore. Later that day, when she was in the shower, I opened her closet and started packing. Not because I had some big plan. Not because I was trying to make a statement. But because I realized I couldn't breathe in that space anymore. Every corner of the apartment smelled like her perfume and his presence. Like my absence was already factored into the design of our life. And yet, I didn't leave. I stood by the door with my duffel bag and waited. I don't even know what I was waiting for. Maybe some small miracle. Maybe a confession. Maybe even a lie I could still believe in. But all I got was steam from the bathroom and the sound of her humming again. Something soft and happy and completely disconnected from the wreckage she'd left behind. And in that moment, I understood something terrible. I was the only one who thought this was the end. To her, it hadn't even started yet. She came out of the shower wrapped in a towel, humming the same upbeat tune as if the world outside that melody didn't exist. I remember watching the condensation on the bathroom mirror behind her slowly fade, revealing her reflection like a ghost materializing. My bag was still by the door. She saw it. She saw me. And still, nothing. No hesitation. No curiosity. No fear. Not even a question. She said, "Going somewhere?" Like I had just picked up groceries. I swallowed. Hard. "I saw your texts." There was a pause, but not the kind I'd imagined. Not the dramatic gasp. Not the shaky breath of guilt or even an ounce of shame. Just a pause. Like when someone drops a fork and casually bends to pick it up. "You went through my phone?" she asked. That's what she focused on. Not the man calling her stunning. Not the emotional affair she was dressing up in intellectualism. Not the slow decay of a marriage she once swore to protect. No, the problem was me. Because I had looked. I didn't go through anything. It lit up right in front of me. I didn't want to see it. I just did. She smirked. Not like she was being cruel, but like she had already made peace with being the villain in my story. That's when I realized something I wasn't prepared to face. She didn't love me anymore. Maybe she hadn't for a long time. And worse, she didn't even care that I knew it. "You're acting like I slept with him," she said, walking past me to the bedroom. "God, Elwood, you're so black and white. So dramatic." I followed her, unable to stop myself. "You told him you wish he was here. You told him I mistreat you. You let him insult me while I was in the room, and you stood there agreeing like I'm some pathetic parasite you're just tolerating." She rolled her eyes and pulled on one of my old t-shirts. The one with the faded jazz band logo from college. "That's not what I said." I laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because it was all so absurd. "I read it, Fallon. I didn't imagine it. This isn't some argument over tone. You emotionally left this marriage and forgot to send the memo." She sat on the bed and began scrolling her phone, not even pretending to listen anymore. Like I was a boring podcast playing in the background of her real life. And then, in the middle of my sentence, while I was begging for dignity, she laughed. Laughed. I stood there, jaw clenched, watching the woman I had once thought was my forever act like I was just another inconvenience to swat away. "I can't do this anymore," I said quietly. She finally looked up. "Then don't. No fight. No apology. Just a challenge disguised as permission." And that's when something inside me shut off. Like someone had found the emergency switch and flipped it hard. I turned away, walked to the kitchen, and stared at the coffee pot that was still warm from that morning. Our last real moment of normal. We had shared silence over eggs and toast, and I thought the silence was comfort. But now I realized it was absence. I sat at the kitchen table and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, but I typed out a message to my brother 3 states away. He had offered me the spare room in his basement before, when things had gotten rocky. I'd always said no. I was too proud, too hopeful. But now, Now I just wrote, "Still got space." Then I hit send. Fallon never came out of the bedroom. And I didn't say goodbye when I finally walked out 2 hours later, bag in hand, life in pieces. She didn't chase me, didn't call, didn't text. And maybe that's the part that will haunt me most. Not the betrayal, but how easy it was for her to let me go. The drive to my brother's house was 4 hours of white noise and road blur. I didn't listen to music. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel sad in the way people usually describe it. I felt like a drawer someone had pulled open and left empty. I had no clever lines, no poetic thoughts, just the repeated image of Fallon on that bed, scrolling her phone while I fell apart in the same room. Kept looping in my mind like an ad I couldn't skip. My brother, Nolan, greeted me at the door in basketball shorts and socks with holes in them. He didn't say anything. He just pulled me in, gave me a one-armed hug, and pointed to the fridge. "I got your weird oat milk and microwave dinners," he said. "Bathrooms down the hall. Basement's yours." It was the kindest thing anyone had done for me in months. I spent the first few days in that basement not sleeping, barely eating, just lying on the lumpy couch and staring at the ceiling that creaked every time someone walked upstairs. I kept waiting for Fallon to call. Not because I wanted her back, at least that's what I told myself, but because I needed her to acknowledge that I had existed, that I hadn't been just a placeholder until something shinier came along. But days passed. Nothing. No calls. No texts. Not even a passive-aggressive email about forwarding her mail. It was like she had pressed delete on me. And to make things worse, I found myself checking her social media. I knew I shouldn't, but I did. I stared at her new photos, laughing with coworkers, attending rooftop events, drinking neon cocktails, and the worst part? She looked lighter, like the weight of pretending to love me had been lifted. That's when it started to really eat at me. Not the affair. Not Brennan or Ash or whatever his name was, but the ease. The way she moved on as if I had never been more than a character in the background of her story. A recurring guest star she quietly wrote out between seasons. And then something strange happened. Nolan came down to the basement one night with 2 beers and this weird look on his face. "Hey," he said, not making eye contact. "You remember Fallon's phone number? Like, her actual number? Not saved in your contacts?" I blinked. "Yeah? Why?" He handed me his phone. I didn't understand what I was looking at first. It was a screenshot of a missed call. Fallon's number. Then another. And another. 10 calls in 3 days. All to him. She didn't leave voicemails. Didn't text. Just kept calling. Like, rapid fire. Then nothing. I didn't know what to say. I just stared at the screen, confused and honestly a little unnerved. Why would she call Nolan? She barely talked to him even when things were good. I hadn't mentioned where I'd gone. I hadn't responded to her once. So how did she know? Unless she already had Nolan's number saved. Unless she had contacted him before. The thought made my skin crawl. My chest tightened. I could barely speak. "You okay?" Nolan asked. But I wasn't. Because for the first time, I realized there was more going on than I knew. Fallon hadn't just replaced me emotionally. She had rerouted everything. Even my own brother felt like a contact in her phone now. And that night I didn't sleep. Instead, I lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering how many versions of our story existed. Hers, mine, his, and which one would be the one people believed. Because something told me she was already rewriting it. I don't remember the exact moment the shift happened. The moment I stopped being heartbroken and started being curious. But it came quietly, like fog creeping across the floor. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way Fallon had called Nolan over and over without ever leaving a trace. Or maybe it was the feeling that I'd left the fire, only to realize it had followed me here, hidden under the floorboards. Something didn't sit right. Not just with Fallon's sudden radio silence, but with how tightly she was trying to control the narrative. Behind my back, through people I trusted, and likely for far longer than I'd ever suspected. One evening, while Nolan was out, I used his desktop to check something I hadn't dared touch before. Our old shared cloud storage. Fallon and I used to sync calendars, receipts, and files through one account, a convenience left over from a simpler time. She was the one who set it up. I just went along with it, never thinking she'd forget I had access. But she had. Inside the folders was a mess of digital debris. Meal plans from 2019, itineraries for canceled vacations, scanned bills, and saved screenshots. Most of it was boring, except one folder titled simply, Workshops. It was hidden inside another folder marked Invoices, which felt odd. Fallon wasn't a workshop person. She didn't attend weekend retreats or group courses. But these files, they told a different story. One was a registration form with her name and Brennan's. The event, Reconnecting Through Honesty, a guided weekend for intimate partners. Dated 4 months ago. Intimate partners. I opened another file. A typed worksheet, clearly Fallon's. The prompts were gutting. What do you fear most about returning to your current home life? She wrote. That I'll keep pretending. What do you long for most in your secret relationship? She wrote. Peace, laughter, and not walking on eggshells. I sat there, hands trembling, staring at those words. Secret relationship. She hadn't just emotionally distanced herself. She had invested in a future without me, emotionally and practically. She had practiced leaving me before she ever picked up her suitcase. But that wasn't the worst part. There were also photos. Innocent at first. Group shots. Name tags. Smiling faces. But then, selfies. Just her and Brennan. One in a hotel room with matching mugs. Another by a fireplace. And one, taken through a mirror. Brennan standing behind her, holding her waist, his face half hidden in her neck. She looked safe, happier than I'd seen her in years, like I had already been erased. I didn't rage. I didn't scream. I just stared and whispered, "So this is who you've become." I copied the folder to a flash drive. Not out of revenge. Not yet. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But I needed to hold it. I needed proof that I hadn't imagined this. That I wasn't crazy. That the marriage I remembered had ended. Just not when I thought it did. When Nolan returned, I asked him flat out, "Why was Fallon calling you?" He froze, shifted his weight, then sighed and sat down heavily beside me. "She said she was worried about you," he admitted. "Said you left angry. That she was scared you'd do something stupid. She didn't know where you went and asked if I'd heard from you." I didn't answer her the first few times. I only picked up once. I stared at him. "And what did you tell her?" "That you were here, but that you didn't want to talk to her. She asked me not to tell you she called." I blinked slowly. She's trying to look like the victim. Nolan didn't deny it. Fallon wasn't reaching out to apologize. She wasn't remorseful. She was creating an alibi. A soft version of the story she could tell others. One where I was unstable, fragile, impulsive. And she? Just the concerned wife trying to help a man who couldn't be helped. Suddenly, I understood what I needed to do. Not scream. Not beg. Not fight. But document. Observe. Prepare. Because Fallon had started writing a version of the truth that suited her. Now it was time I wrote mine. Took me 3 days to decide whether to call her. Not because I wanted to hear her voice, but because I needed to hear which version of me she was performing for. When I finally hit call, it rang only once before going to voicemail. I didn't try again. Instead, I waited to see what she would do with my silence. What she did was nothing. No return call. No message. No apology. No curiosity. She simply vanished into her curated version of the truth. A version where I had been the cold, distant husband who eventually stormed off into the night and abandoned the life she tried to salvage. But now I had the folder. The proof. The photos, the therapy forms, the timeline. Not to use as weapons, but to stitch the real story together for myself, if nothing else. And the more I pieced it together, the more it became clear that Fallon hadn't stumbled into an affair. She had strategized it. Months of emotional groundwork. Quiet exits. Preloaded justifications. Every conversation we'd had in the final 6 months now sounded like something from a script, rehearsed, Deliberate, measured not for connection, but for plausibility. I started documenting everything. Dates, calls, memories that didn't line up. I even revisited old emails between us. The way she subtly shifted blame during arguments, her growing list of misunderstandings, her passive phrasing of phrases like, "I feel smothered," or, "Maybe you need to find your own space." It was all there. Like someone had been gently preparing me to leave so that she wouldn't have to. Then came the part one didn't expect. One night, Nolan and I were watching TV. Nothing serious, just background noise. I had finally started to feel semi-normal again. Even laughed at something dumb he said. That's when his phone buzzed. It was Fallon. I could tell from his face. "She says she's coming here," he said quietly, reading the message aloud. "Just wants to talk. Says she has a right." "A right to what?" I asked, genuinely stunned. He looked just as confused. "She didn't say." For the next 24 hours, I barely slept. Not because I was afraid of seeing her, but because I was terrified she might actually believe her own version of events. That she might walk through that door and treat this like a scene in some breakup film where we cry and hug and she gets the last word while violins play. I wasn't going to let that happen. I wouldn't scream, but I wouldn't sit there and let her narrate over my life either. She arrived just after sunset the next evening. Same soft smile. Same calm demeanor. Her hair was in a loose braid, the kind she used to wear when she didn't want to look like she tried, but still looked put together. She carried a canvas tote bag. Inside it, I didn't ask. "Hi, Elwood," she said, like it was nothing, like we were two adults meeting for coffee. I said nothing. She turned to Nolan. "Can we have a few minutes?" He looked at me. I gave him a subtle nod. He left. She sat down across from me at the small kitchen table like she'd done 1,000 times before. But the weight between us now was suffocating. She placed the bag on the floor gently, then folded her hands. "I didn't come to argue," she began, her voice soft, precise. "I came to explain a few things. You deserve that." I stared at her, letting the silence hang. She took a breath. "I never meant to hurt you. I know you don't believe that, but I didn't. I just stopped feeling like myself in our marriage." And Ash Brennan, he reminded me of parts of me I had buried. "It wasn't about you. It was about—" "Stop," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "Don't spin this like a journey of self-discovery. You planned it. You built a new life behind my back and invited him into a marriage you said you were still part of. That's not confusion. That's design." She blinked, clearly caught off guard. Maybe she expected me to break down or beg or accuse her with wild irrationality. But I didn't. I was calm, focused, and she hated that. Her tone shifted, almost desperate. "You were always so closed off, Elwood. I tried to connect, but you made it so hard. I felt invisible." I smiled coldly. "You didn't feel invisible when you were in hotel rooms writing love letters to someone else. You didn't feel invisible when you called my brother behind my back to manipulate the story." Her mouth opened, but no words came. So I leaned in and said the one thing I knew would snap her version of events in two. "I found the folder, Fallon. I know everything." She froze. Her hands clenched, just slightly, then relaxed again. But her eyes told me she had been caught completely off guard. I stood up. "You can leave now." She didn't move right away. She just sat there, like she was trying to calculate a salvageable ending. But there wasn't one, and she knew it. When she finally stood and grabbed the tote bag, she paused at the door. "You were never as invisible as you thought," she said. "That was the problem." And then she walked out. It was quiet for a long time after that. And in the silence, I realized something. I wasn't broken anymore. I was awake. I expected her to retaliate. That's what people like Fallon do when their image fractures. They scramble to reconstruct it. A week passed with no word. Then 2. Then 3. I didn't reach out. I didn't react. And that silence must have terrified her more than any shouting match ever could. Because Fallon thrived in chaos she could steer. But stillness? Stillness robbed her of control. And for the first time I had stopped dancing to her rhythm. It was Nolan who gave me the heads up. He walked into the basement with this strange look on his face and handed me his phone. "You should see this," he said. It was a screenshot from one of those local Facebook groups Fallon and I used to mock together, the kind filled with dog-sitting posts and yard sales. Someone had shared a photo from a recent corporate mixer. There was Fallon, bright and smiling, hand in hand with Brennan. The caption read, "Our favorite creative duo finally made it official. Love wins." But the comments, they weren't kind. Apparently, Fallon had underestimated just how many people in her life had known us as a couple. One woman wrote, "Wait, wasn't she married to that music teacher? This is so awkward." Another said, "This feels too soon, even for agency people, lol." One post even linked back to a Reddit thread from months ago. Someone had anonymously shared a story that sounded eerily familiar. My story, word for word. And the part that gutted me? Fallon had replied. She didn't out herself, not directly. But I recognized her voice instantly. The polished, calculated sentences pretending to be casual. She framed the marriage as emotionally toxic, said I had checked out years ago, and claimed she had done the hard work of leaving with compassion. Compassion. I almost laughed. So there it was. Her new truth. Packaged. Curated. Market-tested. The version that made her feel like a survivor, not a betrayer. She wasn't just rewriting our story. She was selling it. But I didn't respond. Not there. Not online. I didn't even tell Nolan what I was going to do. Instead, I made one quiet phone call. To my old friend Camden, a former student of mine who now worked freelance for a documentary production company. Years ago, Fallon and I helped him edit a short film for his portfolio. He still owed me a favor. I cashed it in. A week later, I uploaded a private video. Just a few minutes long. No drama. No blame. No faces. Just my voice, narrating what happened. No exaggerations. No venom. Just facts. Emails. Dates. The worksheet from the couple's workshop. The screenshot of Fallon calling my brother 10 times. I didn't say her name. I didn't need to. The truth was enough. I uploaded it to a shared Google Drive folder and sent the link to one person. Fallon. I added no message. I don't know how long she took to open it, but when she did, everything changed. I didn't hear from her directly. Instead, I got a text from Brennan. A single sentence. "You win." I stared at it for a long time, not because I wanted to reply, but because I suddenly realized he had no idea what I'd done. He assumed I had gone public, that I'd exposed her. But I hadn't. The file was private, between Fallon and me, which meant she showed him. And if she showed him, that meant one thing. The truth scared her more than the scandal. Because the truth wasn't loud. It was quiet. It was undeniable. It didn't scream for attention. It just waited. Waited for someone like her to trip over it. A day later, Fallon texted me. "You didn't need to do that." And I finally replied, "I know. That's what makes it real." I haven't heard from her since. And maybe that's the real ending. Not a blowout. Not a legal battle. Not a war of words. Just the quiet, irreversible realization that the person you loved never truly existed the way you imagined. She had created a version of me that fit her escape story, and I destroyed it with silence. There's a quiet kind of freedom that comes after the noise dies down. Not the dramatic movie montage kind, but the real one. The kind where you wake up one morning, and the first thought that greets you isn't about her. Where the air feels still again, and the world stops tasting like betrayal. That day came quietly for me. No grand gesture. No epiphany. Just me standing in a used bookstore, flipping through a worn copy of East of Eden, realizing I hadn't checked Fallon's social media in over 2 weeks, and I didn't feel the urge to. I moved out of Nolan's basement shortly after that. Not because I felt forced out, he never made me feel that way, but because I needed a space that didn't come with pity baked into the walls. I found a tiny loft on the edge of town. Nothing fancy. Exposed brick, creaky floors, a window that whistled in the wind. But it was mine. Mine to fill with books, with quiet, with music I liked. Mine to heal in without pretending I was okay before I actually was. Teaching became different too. I started showing up with something lighter in my voice. The kids noticed it before I did. One of them even said, "You smile now when the trumpet section messes up," which made me laugh out loud. Turns out, when you stop trying to hold together someone else's version of you, you finally have the strength to become your own. Fallon never reached out again. No surprise calls. No emails. Brennan disappeared from every post I ever found him in. I imagine their version of the story didn't survive the pressure of real honesty. And maybe that's justice enough, not revenge, but consequence. As for me, I didn't go back to the man I was before her. That man was fragile, quiet in the wrong ways, and terrified of confrontation. I didn't want to return to that. Instead, I built someone new, someone slower to trust maybe, but also more grounded. Someone who could sit in his own pain without letting it swallow him. And now, when people ask me what happened between Fallon and me, I don't give them the messy version. I don't hand them the wound. I just say, we outgrew the same story. Because that's what healing taught me. Some people leave and others remove themselves. Fallon didn't just leave. She erased me so she could write herself a better role. But I took back the pen. And now, I'm the only author of this chapter. Thank you for listening to this story here on Reddit Confessions. If something in it reminded you of a moment from your own life, maybe a turning point, a final conversation, or the second you realized the person in front of you wasn't who they claimed to be, share it in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to read tonight. And if you made it this far, you're stronger than you think. See you in the next confession.